Let's talk about dystopic themes in media, books, movies, TV series. So I feel like a lot of us can engage with dystopic media on quite a visceral level, and that's not necessarily because it's like watching it and being like, that would really suck if that happened, but more the fact that it uses a lot of elements of real world problems and it gives some credence to the experience. It is a lot of the time threats that we can actively recognize. A lot of popular dystopic media takes a lot of inspiration from the frailty of society, whether that be through inspecting real world events like what's happened in history, or more the fact that these are things that we could logically see happen in the future, is what gives dystopic media that oomph, that believability. These themes generally range from totalitarianism, fascism, dictatorships, dehumanization, class warfare, eugenics, what the world would be like if total climate collapse happened or even economic collapse happened. Logan's Run, we destroyed much of the remaining natural landscape and resources, and now humankind is overpopulated into small areas left habitable. So as soon as you turn 30, you're gonna die. THX 1138, automation, surveillance, controlling humans, and because their life has been made so meaningless, we give them pointless busy work to keep them pacified. Also, it's illegal to have sex. Soylent Green, whoops, global climate collapse happened, and now we are restricted for food sources. So we are secretly feeding people other people. The Handmaid's Tale, what if people can't have babies anymore except for a select small few, so we must reinstate slavery and servitude. But for white ladies, Animal Farm, what if farmers were dictators and animals were socialist democrats? 1984, surveillance, oppression, Big Brother is watching. Brave New World, class division, propaganda, psychological conditioning. Also, Bernard Max is short and ugly, and we have to feel bad for him. Fahrenheit 451, suppression of knowledge in order to gain intellectual control over society. Dark City, the pale guys are using psychokinesis to repress people in order to control how society functions. The Matrix, automation, suppression. Please, Neo, we need you because you're a woke hacker. Neo, please. The Hunger Games. Okay, no, but hear me out on this one. So a totalitarian government punishes the lower class for a class rebellion by instating a tournament each year where children from each division must compete against each other in a sacrificial slaughter, to then have it given back to the public as a form of entertainment, distraction, and desensitization to gratuitous violence, to then have the winner be awarded with the opportunity to exist outside of the poverty that they have lived in most of their lives as a tool to silence them and allow them to benefit from oppression. In this video, we will talk about how the Hunger Games is actually better than you give it credit for. Not really. But okay, so let's look at this. Do you think that these stories in dystopic media serve as like a cautionary tale or a way to alert us to the insidiousness of oppression? Or do you think that these actually do kind of a disservice and disillusion us so that we are lulled into a false sense of security by thinking that, like when this happens, this is when we know we're in a sticky situation? The reality is that in the real world, when these dystopic themes happen in real life, it's a lot more subtle than what we are shown in fiction. Concentration camps didn't exactly pop up day one of Nazi rule in Germany. It was a long process of propaganda, falsified information, censoring of the press. And then on the other side of it, you had a fear element where people had to follow their government because otherwise they were guilty by omission. During the Cold War, a popular phrase that was patriotized was better dead than red, which basically meant that, being a communist is basically the worst thing you can ever be. And I'm not gonna, have a history lesson right now because I don't exactly think the USSR were perfect and great. And I also think that the US is kind of fucking terrible too. But it's like these kinds of phrases that are elements to propaganda, people still to this day think that being a commie or being a socialist is like a really bad thing. It's un-American. And that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted to get people patriotic and caring about America, and also the fact that they wanted to say capitalism is a better system. And people still believe that. In reality, when these things do happen, it's a lot more covert than we give it credit for. It's not the government just deciding one day we should solve our overpopulation problem by eating people. It's a long process of small, innocuous steps, scaffolding with bits of bills and legislature and laws being passed. And a lot of the time, it's things that you don't even notice. When you look at a single puzzle piece, you don't see the overall picture from that one piece. It's only when you see the greater picture is when you assemble the entire thing together. So that's why I'm going to talk about the movie Enemy. Enemy is a 2013 movie starring Jake Gyllenhaal. It is based on the book The Double by Jose Saramago, not to be confused with The Double by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which was also adapted into a movie called The Double. And they have very similar themes on surface level. I mean, they're both good movies, but let's talk about Enemy. So the very first open shot of the movie is a caption taken directly from the book. And that caption reads, "Chaos is order yet undeciphered." And this phrase is kind of the key to understanding the movie to an extent. When you watch it for the first time, if you're not aware of the subtext, it does read very chaotic. It does kind of seem directionless and weird. Only when you understand the subtext is when you are able to decipher it. So on surface level, Enemy is about a man who discovers he has a doppelganger. And your very first Easter egg to indicate that there's more to this story than what meets the eye is in your very first opening scene. It's this weird scene in like this sex club kind of thing. I'm not going to unpack it or explain it to you because I feel like part of the experience of this movie is watching it for yourself. But just keep in mind that spiders and spider-like themes are integral to understanding this movie. So your first indication to what the subtext of this movie kind of is in the scene following straight after the first one. We meet Jake 1, who is a history professor. And in this scene, he is giving a lecture on fascism and totalitarianism.
Control. It's all about control. Every dictatorship has one obsession, and that's it. So in ancient Rome, they gave the people bread and circuses. They kept the populace busy with entertainment. But other dictatorships use other strategies to control ideas, the knowledge. How do they do that? Lower education. They limit culture, censor information. They censor any means of individual expression. And it's important to remember this, that this is a pattern that repeats itself throughout history.
Yes, this movie is about totalitarianism. The story arc of the doppelganger serves as a distraction. So as you go through the first kind of quarter of the movie, we learn that Jake 1 has a very rudimentary life. He is very structured and sticks to a routine. And in this structure, he abstains a lot from entertainment and socializing, apart from, his girlfriend, who, their relationship doesn't seem great either, but you get the idea that maybe the monotony of this routine is starting to wear him down. So one day, in a very kind of out of character decision, he asks for a movie recommendation from a coworker. This is where we are introduced to Jake 2. So Jake 1 is very involved in theory and education, and in thinking that he's avoiding distractions, he's actually kind of becoming preoccupied with sticking to this routine. Maybe he's so preoccupied with doing things the same way every day, he doesn't notice the things that are happening around him. He isn't seeing the signs, regardless of how subtle they are in the beginning. And maybe it's only subtle to us, the viewer, because we are seeing it through the scope of Jake 1. And he is very secure in the idea that he knows. He is lulled into a false sense of security because he knows. Well, he thinks he knows. And this is kind of his blind spot. You know, those who live in ivory towers. So Jake 1 sees Jake 2 after seeing him in the background of the movie he was recommended. And this shifts his motivations. He goes from being very involved in his theory and his teaching to becoming full-blown obsessed with finding out who this other Jake is. And like I said, for the most part, this is a doppelganger movie, so it does go on quite a while with this storyline before we are kind of shaken back to these core themes. In a scene that is a big city shot, and over the city is a massive spider, which looks a lot like Maman by Louise Bourgeois. I have two theories for why this is. The first one being that maybe this is an indication that the invasion is well underway, and we're merely seeing through the fact that Jake is preoccupied, so he's not noticing this, or maybe the whole public isn't noticing it. And that's why my second theory is the city that this movie is set in was actually the city where Maman was on public display for like quite a while. So maybe there is coincidence in the fact that the spider looks eerily similar to Maman. Maybe it's a commentary on how people don't notice insidious things when they don't look out of the ordinary. And so here's something that I found really kind of cool with the detailing of this story, and that is the blueberries thing. There are two scenes in this movie where organic blueberries are brought up. And this is just one of those cool little things that, if you're aware of this fact, it's like a nod to the viewer. Here's the thing. Spiders are quite known to lay their nests and live inside bushes of fruits, particularly berries, so strawberries, grapes, and blueberries. They don't do this because they eat the blueberries. They actually can't taste blueberry, like the sugars in it. But spiders eat pests that are attracted to fruits, so fruit flies, for example. It's interesting that he is very adamant about having organic blueberries. So these are blueberries that aren't treated with pesticides that would kill off these pests. I don't know if you've bought organic fruit before, but a lot of the time there are sometimes dead bugs in your batch. And it's one of those little detailing things that I just appreciate so much. So this is the part of the video where I'm going to be discussing spoilers and how the film ends. So you can either pause the video right here and go watch the movie right now, or I'll leave a timestamp here and you can skip to that bit, but just know that you may miss a lot of the context. So a sequence of events happens that allow Jake 1 to go to Jake 2's apartment. And as he's trying to enter the apartment building, he can't get in because obviously he doesn't have the keys and stuff. But an assistant lets him inside. And the assistant leads him to the room under the false pretenses that he just lost his key. And as they're walking there, he mentions something about that insidious sex club thing at the start of the movie.
I know I shouldn't talk about this, but I'd love to go back.
Which maybe indicates one of two things. One being that maybe Jake 2 is a high figure in this enclave, or maybe that Jake 2 is some sort of official that has social pull over what happens at these events. So as Jake 1 sits in Jake 2's apartment, he actually notices something. He sees a picture across the room, but it's not a picture of Jake 2. It's actually a picture of Jake 1. And we see this picture of Jake 1 earlier in the movie when he's looking up headshots and he uses a picture of himself to compare. What the fuck? Simultaneously, as this is happening, Jake 2 is at Jake 1's apartment. There's this like scene where he's having sex with Jake 1's girlfriend, and she kind of notices it's not Jake 1 and freaks out a bit, and they get into an argument. But then it cuts to a scene where they're in a car together and they're having an argument, and the argument kind of gives off this vibe that maybe they know each other. Just the way that they talk to each other and the way that he repeats over and over again.
I'm not a man. You need to get excited. I'm not a man. I'm not a fucking man. Get out.
It has some kind of feeling that they're familiar with each other. And then the car crashes and we are left with this slow pan and zoom into the window of the side of the car where the crack looks suspiciously like a spider's web. This is where we talk about the very final scene. So, Jake 1 is still in Jake 2's apartment and it's the next day. He has a letter that he found at the start of the movie that is addressed to Jake 2 and he opens it. And inside this letter is a key. As he pockets the key, he is talking to Helen, who is Jake 2's wife. And she walks into another room and doesn't respond. So he walks to the room that she entered and we are left with this shot.
Helen?
Cut to black. When I first saw this movie and I saw that final scene, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, where did that come from? I just thought it was really weird and random. But as we are told at the start of the movie, chaos is order yet undeciphered. So why spiders? What do spiders have in significance with the theme of totalitarianism? This all ties back to that opening speech at the beginning of the movie, and Jake mentions that these things happen in patterns.
And it's important to remember this, that this is a pattern that repeats itself.
Think of how a spider's web is built. You build a spider's web thread by thread. A single thread alone, not a big deal. You can easily break a single thread of spider's web. Even a bug could easily escape from that. But as you add more and more thread to the spider's web, you strengthen that structural cohesion and fortify it. When you have an entire web built, it's seemingly indestructible to the prey. If you get caught in the web, all you can do is struggle and try and break free, but likely just wait until you die. So despite the double, like the novel, not actually having these spider themes in them and not necessarily being super totalitarian themey, it was more of a invasion of the body snatchers in the book. Jose Saramago was actually very outspoken about totalitarianism. He grew up in Portugal during a fascist regime, so he has lived first-hand experience. In fact, Denis Villeneuve and Javier Guillen, the director and screenwriter of the movie, plucked this spider analogy straight from Saramago's other works.
There is no lack of spiders' webs in the world. From some you escape, in others you die. The fugitive will find shelter in a boarding house under an assumed name, thinking he is safe. He has no idea that his spider will be the daughter of the landlady, a dedicated nationalist who will regenerate his heart and mind.
And another just little factor to consider, because this movie is so layered, is the concept of individuality. Individuality is kind of the enemy to fascism, to uniformity. You'll kind of notice as the film progresses, Jake 1's personality kind of changes and develops into something more similar to Jake 2's personality, being that he's very selfish, very self-centered, very arrogant, and, you know, as Jake 1 said,
They censor any means of individual expression.
So Enemy kind of ends where a lot of dystopic media kind of begins. The threat is there and chaos ensues. Whereas enemy is more, the threat's been here a while and it's been building strength and building power until it reaches a catalyst. You don't notice what's happening around you until there's a giant spider in your room. There is other media that kind of breaks down this gradual process because obviously the spider analogy is in reference to legislation and laws being passed that allow these corrupt governments to gain power. This is done kind of sloppily in the TV series adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale. It does highlight certain laws being passed and how they affect the freedom of the characters that end up being oppressed. But they kind of gloss over the fact that laws and legislation don't just happen. There's steps and processes that lead to reaching a boiling point. But obviously, for entertainment's sake, you can't break down every single piece that led to the, breakdown of society because we'd be here all day long talking about politics, and I guess that's not entertaining for viewers to watch. But like I said, this fortification, usually done through passing laws and legislation and bills, I can understand that telling how it happened is a lot harder to fathom than looking back on it in a retrospective way, maybe through a quick cutscene that takes a few minutes. But I think Enemy does it really well because even though it's not like explicit in the way real world totalitarianism happens, it has that accurate element of little things changing that you don't even notice if you're not inspecting it close enough. Because it isn't a very explicit thing most of the time. It's very clandestine. If the threat presented super obviously right off the bat, don't you think there would be some kind of collective effort to stop that from getting to a point where it's, total totalitarianism or fascism or dictatorship? And I know that's kind of an oversimplification of the circumstances because a lot of the time when these structures start to build, kind of the first steps they take is 1, stripping people of their civil liberties and their freedom, and 2, fortifying martialization. And this is exactly why we should be concerned about laws that get passed that make it harder for people to protest and strike, and also allow police to have martial law over protesters and strikers. This is why we kind of should be concerned about surveillance, because as much as we're told that this is an effort to stop terrorism, it's also used for other means. Spying on the public, collecting data, collecting our personal information to use against us. This is why media blackouts and censoring of the press are very concerning things. Think about what's happening in China. Think about what happened in Sudan. Think about what's happening in America right now. First, you introduce this concept of the other. You allow people to feel validated in their xenophobia. This gives you the ability to then create law and legislation to remove freedom and personal rights from people based on their status. This status being illegal immigrants. These laws are introduced and they threaten the safety of people crossing the border. And then you can continue to vilify them to the point where you create a private sector of pseudo-police who can remove them from their homes, their workplaces, break apart families, and lock them in what is essentially a prison for people who have done nothing wrong. They're concentration camps.
And it's important to remember this, that this is a pattern that repeats itself.
And these squalid conditions are things that law and legislation has been built around so that human rights officials can't do anything about it. It's easy enough for us to look at 1984 and say, wow, that's so crazy because it feels like that's almost happening right now. But when you really think about it, how long has this process been in the works? How long has there been scaffolding to get to the point where, surveillance and attacking of personal freedoms has been a thing that's been increasing and intensifying? This is why it's kind of essential to never downplay the impact of certain laws and bills and legislation. I know I've been saying that a lot, but it's essential to never downplay their impact, because when the government can see that they can pass certain laws, legislation, and bills without much backlash, it says to them, how much can we get away with? How much further can we take this? And more importantly, how can we continue to impact the freedom of very specific individual groups and demographics? It's a slippery slope. It's also a clear indication that it doesn't stop there. It is threads on the spider's web. Thanks so much for watching, party people. Just before I get into my recommendations for this video, I just want to quickly talk about myself here. So in the past week, I reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and so I will be planning a 1K celebration video. Gonna probably get drunk and answer some questions. So I will link below a Twitter thread and my curious cat for anyone who wants to drop any questions in there. But also, you could probably just drop some comments on this video if you wanted, and I will be answering those. I don't have a community tab just yet, so unfortunately this is the only way I can actually engage with all of my subscribers. But keep your eyes peeled because I will be doing that. So if you have any burning questions or just anything you wanted to say, or even, I don't know, tell me to do something funny for the camera, I don't know. Yeah, just if this piques your interest, go ahead and ask me something. But I mean, yeah, you know. Anyways, on to my recommendations. So the first video I'm going to recommend is by Kelly Zahos. She made a video about white America, the working class, how like lower income culture is kind of prone to being manipulated by oppressive power structures. I really can't explain this very well. I feel like she definitely goes into it a lot better than I can. Grab yourself a glass of wine because it is a long one and it is quite packed full of theory and information. So it's definitely something you have to sit down and really take in. It's also directed very beautifully, very art house, so I highly recommend that. Please check out this video and also subscribe to her channel. The next two videos actually kind of tie into the themes of, I guess, this video a little bit. So the first video I want to recommend from one of these creators is by Andar Nation Propaganda. She did a video on national identity and nationalism. I just think it ties in really well because obviously nationalism and national identity are kind of elements of oppressive power structures, and just learning about the theory behind that is really interesting and kind of useful information. The next video I want to recommend is by Caltrops Delastrada. She did a video on class struggle in England. It's a historical video, so we look back on what class struggle was like prior to the rise of capitalism, or I guess in the early stages of capitalism. Honestly, I think history is our best indicator of knowing what will happen in the future, so knowing these kinds of things is very useful. I highly recommend watching her video, so that will be linked below, and also subscribe to her channel. The final video I want to recommend is by Alext. This is more of a chill video, I think. He just recently made a video talking about how BreadTube radicalizes people to the left and his personal experience with that. But I also think, you know, a lot of us have, you know, become more left-leaning since the rise of BreadTube. So it's just really interesting to watch someone's personal experience with that. I'm pretty sure he may have a new video coming out soon as well, so who knows, by the time this is up, his new video may be up too, so please subscribe to him. Alright, so shout out to my patrons, Hannah Jacob, General Line, Justin McCulloch, Trans Rats, Schlee, and Il Caesar, and a special shout out to my $10 tier patrons. A guy requested to do a Cali surfer accent, so like, you know, whatever. So thanks heaps to Melanie. Thank you, Shadow Mage, and thanks heaps to Eric Keen, Cowabunga, and fucking Shred, dude. Really appreciate it. Gonna go fucking surf or something. We have surfers in Australia, and it's weird how similar the culture is. Yeah, so thanks for watching. You can follow me on Twitter at TReynoldsSucks, and you can join my Patreon which is just patreon.com/TashReynolds. Both will be linked down below. You don't actually have to type out the URLs. So please subscribe if you want to. I'm not going to force you. And I will see you in my next video.